that there's like at the top of the header there even takes you to the CSIC kind of page where they have tips and tricks for you there, along with you'll be able to find just some other YouTube videos throughout here. So I want to ask you right away, just what actions or strategies have you used or for interview preparation? So what are you doing right now, or what have you done in the past? So just take a moment, find a space within one of those columns there and just type something in. If you're fighting with someone with that space, don't fret, just wait and find another spot that will be open. I'll give you about 30 seconds to write something down. I'm going to put the Google Doc in the chat one last time. For whoever just entered into the room, check out the chat and you'll see the Google Doc there. I'll take care of, once you've written something down, you just put a +1 down for any other things that you're doing, just so it's a reminder of like, yeah, I've done a whole bunch of different things. I'll take care of the plus for the webinar. We have about 26 participants right now. So again, attending this webinar is something that you are doing. You're spending an hour of your busy time, 4:30 on a Thursday, to be here, and I do appreciate that. I'm going to just peruse a little bit of what some of you have shared, and I think hopefully for some of you, you'll be able to see like, oh, there's going to be some good ideas here, or things that you might have done in the past that you forgot about. So, and let's see what some of the popular ones are so far. Talking to people who have done the interview before. Can I just double check? Can you see my Google Doc screen? I just want to verify it's not showing. Can I get a yes from anyone? Are you able to? Thank you, Esther. Appreciate it. Looking at the dietetics website for sure, going over your experiences, friends interviewing, reading journals. That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't done that one. I thought of that one recently, but that's pretty good. Jar full of interview questions, really some great ideas and some stuff that I'll talk about right now. And really what you're trying to do is you're trying to use a mixture of things that are comfortable to you, but also maybe pushing you a little bit out of your comfort zone, kind of expanding your kind of practice and confidence as well. Number one thing, why I do this in every single one of the sessions, if you've been in some sessions with me before, it is really a great question to start before you practice writing, before you do your interview practice, because again, the research shows that when your brain is in a positive space, you will just feel a little bit more confident. You're more open to learn. So this is an actual question I use all the time when I'm about to do something new, when I'm about to make my webinar, before I even do a webinar such as this. So I want you to consider just doing this question, because it also is acknowledgement like, oh, I am doing things, because sometimes we might be panicking or we're like, I'm not ready, when we actually are. It's just like final exams in many ways. I want to acknowledge that, oh no, crying. Well, let's hope that's not a big part of your action strategy. But yeah, sometimes actually, you know what? Sometimes a cry is a good release. So yeah, that is actually not a bad strategy in many ways. I want to acknowledge that we're on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the must-win people. At UBC today, I'm in my office here at Macmillan, and so a lot of gratitude to be able to be on this land, and a lot of gratitude to be with all of you today. We get to learn with each other for the next while. And so I hope again that you can ask yourself, what is something I can carry today, learn and put into my basket in terms of my interviewing skills? I think that's a great way of actually acknowledging how we're guests to the hosts of this land. And so I think there hopefully something for all of you, but part of it is also being open to hearing and identifying maybe new things, or just even tweaking things that you're doing. All right, let's keep this ball rolling. The way I think about interviews, right? The kind of inter, right? Inter means between. So I think about interviews like between your views, between you and the committee. And so in many ways, I think of like, you can think about, you have your stories, your values, they're looking for evidence from you, they're thinking about their values, and you're just thinking about like, what do you have and what do they need and how that overlaps. And so when they're thinking about like, the dietetics profession, and are you going to be a good fit, are you going to be a good contributor to this profession, I think that's a little bit helpful, again, thinking about their audience. Sometimes in the interview we think about ourselves so much, which makes sense. We're trying to practice, we're trying to build a conference where our stories are like, so it's like a lot of me, but sometimes you want to make sure, how am I framing some of my stories to address the audience and seeing how I can showcase that I'm a good fit for the program. Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's something I like to think about. The metaphor we're going to use for today is something that hopefully resonates with you because you are students. I just want to think about interviews they're like final exams. So to me, like interviews can be a little bit overwhelming, and just like a final exam, right? A final exam is a one-time event with a lot of pressure, a lot of things riding on it that you have to perform. And so you are constantly trying to get to a level of like, I don't want to be too overconfident, but I don't also want to be like, super nervous that I cannot do this sort of work. So I really want you to think a little bit about final exams, and we're going to use that framing to go through, because I think when you're stuck as you prep, you can say like, oh, what would I be doing as a student? How is it similar? And that's a great way of actually dealing with a lot of uncertainty or unclarity when we're thinking about things. So I think about the phases. And so what we're going to do is, part of it is identifying what stage you are at in terms of your studying. So you can think about like the prepping and organizing. I sometimes call that the procrastinating, where I'm like, making my notes and my desk nice and clean and tidy, those sort of things. But it is what it is. But there's things that we want to do to sometimes get ourselves to a point where like, I'm ready to study. Number two, I think about actually going through our notes. So it's like going through our notes, making sense, synthesizing, looking for connections, thinking about how we're conveying some of these ideas, looking for like what's needed, what's not, predicting what they're going to ask on the test. And the last one I think about in this stage is like, you're getting closer and closer to exam. Now you're just trying to say, okay, I've done the work. I've made sense of the notes and the concepts. Now I want to try to apply them. I'm going to do practice exams, could do practice questions. I'm going to do things that mimic as best as I can the final. One thing that's a little bit different when we're thinking about interviews is, in the course, you have content given to you, right? Your instructor, your professor. In this case, we are going to do a secondary step of, you need to write your textbook. And what I mean by that is, it's the storytelling, it's the stories that you have. You are the course, and we need to mine that a little bit before we can do some of these other things. So let's start with writing your textbook, everyone. In this case here, really at this stage, and you can start doing that right now, it's just writing. It's generating ideas. And what I want to be very clear for myself at this stage, I'm not too concerned about the quality of my stories, or is it perfect? I think a lot of times when people are writing, they're already writing with the final draft in mind, like the final product. I just want to get pen to paper. That's what I've learned over the years, just getting pen to paper. Then I can edit, then I can look at it later. But I want to get things in my head onto paper. And there's a lot of different ways I can do that when I might have some writer's block, or sometimes I have this feeling like I don't know, or I don't have those stories. So I'm going to share one or two methods that I do. You're going to test one with me, and then I'm going to give you a list of other ideas, and I'll expand on a couple more. So one quick fact, I did a biopsychology degree for my undergrad here at UBC, and I learned that we are 22 times more likely to remember a fact if it's buried in a story. I'm going to say that again, 22 times more. So if you think about the typical format for dietetics, 15 minutes, 5 questions, 3 minutes per question, right, approximately, and you're trying to make an impression, you're trying to engage. Hopefully they remember you a little bit more, right? At the end, when I'm interviewing, you take a look at all the candidates you've listened to, and hopefully you can recall things just beyond the notes that you've written, right? And the impressions that you made. So again, I'm going to say that again, 22 times more kind of, vivid if you are using a story. And I think storytelling is a skill that all of you can do and have done. It's just that sometimes we believe we can't do it. So that here's one way I look at it. Typical question, let's say, tell us about a time you struggled on a team. So I put that in red there. I might use something like the CAR method. So the CAR method is either like challenge, context, action, result. It's my favorite method right now because our brain really works well in threes. When you're providing an argument and evidence, people like to hear in threes. And so I like to think about challenge, action, result in threes. I might get to 3 sentences or 6 sentences. You'll see later on STAR method, which is 4 steps. I mean, you can use whatever you want. I've just been really heavily using the CAR method recently for my own reflection. So what I want you to, again, remember, I'm going to ask you right now. Now, you don't have to do this on the Google Doc. I recognize you might not be comfortable, but I am going to ask all of you right now, not to overthink it. You're going to take like a minute just to write out a CAR story. I gave you a question. You don't have to use that. You could just even think about like, oh, what's an experience on my resume that I've done, and provide a CAR example. And then I will share one of mine, and then I'm going to use that later on to show how I could turn that CAR story into a way of like answering the actual interview question. So right now I'm just thinking of like, yeah, what's a episode or a story that I maybe struggled on a team. Okay, I'll give you like a minute just to type on your own. And if you're comfortable, you can type it into the Google Doc or again into a different location. If you're not comfortable sharing that. And I understand that because as you're kind of wrapping up, I want to also be clear. Again, at this point, some of you are at different levels of ideation. So some of you are more comfortable writing these stories. I'm going to push all of you again. Don't worry about being right. I really at this stage want to just get more comfortable putting my words on paper. So, don't again edit as you write, just get it on paper. Some things I also think about in this case is I'm I'm not too worried about choosing like massive stories either. Sometimes it can be those small stories that are also impactful. So I'm not again really assessing like, is this something super important or huge compared to something else? I'm just getting whatever comes to my mind on the piece of paper. So I'll give you an example where I might think about time I struggled on a team, and so the challenge was I was a co-chair for peer programs at UBC, and I had another new person that I was working with, and we actually were having a very difficult time initially like working together. We were actually disagreeing on a lot of things, and I could sense there was a lot of tension there. Um, what I did to what actions I took. Well, first of all, I realized like it wasn't just them, it was me as well. And we actually had a one-off meeting on our own. We actually had a meeting outside of the actual regular meeting where we hashed out some issues. We talked about what we were noticing, what we could do together, because we both agreed we did want to work with each other and we did want to actually help the peer programs table. And that action was simply just, talking to that person. My result was we actually really had a very positive space. We continued to work really well. The team did very well actually from that, because we were providing really good leadership because we were working well together. Now, as I'm saying this out loud, this is the issue. I can already recognize I'm speaking a lot. I wouldn't be using this. And that's why the writing, I know if I was to actually type this out like I probably should have, I would probably be a little bit more clear getting it to 6 sentences. I can already see that I'm already jumping head to of like thinking about interview style question. And so I'm already maybe doing too much. I want to just actually maybe get the details and some of the beats down to then be able to see, okay, what is resonating, what is a little bit more engaging, what makes more sense with what I'm trying to do. All right. So I will do the CAR method quite a bit. I do it once a day now. I do it as a reflection at the end of my day, but a nice, easy thing you could do, again, look at your cover letter, look at your resume, and take some of those experience there and think about like what's a CAR like thing out of that. Now, that's typically for like behavioral type of questions. We probably are going to expect a few of those sort of questions on your interview. They're going to want to hear something about like, how did you deal with this? How did you grow? How did you learn? Again, I don't know the exact questions. I purposely make sure I don't, but I would probably ascertain that there's going to be questions around that. So I'm going to jump to, and sorry, I forgot to navigate 2 things, and I'll do that right now. Later on, you can make a copy for yourself. So you can see I've shown make a copy. And then also on the side here, this document outline, you can jump around in the document to the header. So if you get lost with me while you're trying to follow, you can just jump to there. So I'm going to now go to some ways to write, and I'm going to just talk about a couple things that I've pretty much used every single thing that you've seen here. Now, doesn't mean I like all of them, but I'm just, again, showing how I keep on experimenting when I'm trying to write. And really, I'm trying to develop a habit for my entire life. We don't need you to do that right now, but certainly you can do these things really quickly in your day when you're taking breaks while you're studying, at night, in the morning, these sort of things. So the CAR method is my favorite right now. Of course, I would be going through your resume cover letter. One reminder, everyone, you are at a different stage of an interview. You're not at the type of interview they're screening to see like, oh, are you going to be a fit? Like you have been chosen and selected saying, we think you're going to be good for dietetics. So this is a different style. It's like less of like sometimes even convincing, like, look at the experience I've done. It's more like talking and connecting about your experiences of how it showcases your passion for dietetics, what you're bringing, what you're going to learn, et cetera, right? So I think sometimes I'm not saying you wouldn't do that for all the questions, but I would be strategizing like maybe I don't need to every time be talking about what I've done. Look at me. But I might want to make sure that I talk about the things I've done, again, how they're connecting about how I'd be a great fit for being a colleague with that person, right? There's going to be a dietitian across on the screen with you. So just something that I've been thinking about. So I've used concept maps to sketch out things because I'm just trying to edit. This is actually the one I do the most these days. When I wake up first thing in the morning, I actually grab my iPhone notes and I just start typing. And I'm doing that for my LinkedIn post. What I find is when I'm kind of like out of it, I'm less like critical of my writing and I'm just like free flow writing. Then I can look at it later. If it's gibberish, I can try to edit it and make sense of it. So again, I'm just tossing out ideas and strategies for you to be like, yeah, I want to try to do something different to level up in this competitive process. I use voice memos, all the time. anytime I have a good idea or thought, a phrase, a word, I want to make sure I capture it. This morning, actually, I had a really good phrase and I forgot about it. And now I can't even recall it. I'm old. And so it's just something like you don't know when that inspiration is going to hit you. There's a whole bunch of other ones here that I'll let you read through, but I'm going to talk about some weird ones just here too. I mean, going for a long walk, if you think about a lot of people think a lot when they're on a walk. So it's like they just get out, they almost like kind of blank out, but then they might start thinking about that. So I find long walks actually very helpful for my thought process. Getting off the internet is one where you want to unclutter your brain for storytelling, mining your brain for stories. But then the converse is, again, maybe following certain people on social media to provide you a spark of interest, excitement, or just even inspiration. So there's a few people I follow regularly on LinkedIn, for instance, and Twitter and Instagram, where I've curated my social media feed to really propel me to have more of a habit of, thinking about storytelling, for instance. Okay, I'm going to be quiet and let you just look at this list here. And again, put a +1 down and keep a cumulative total. This is where you're, with intentionality, telling your brain, I want to focus on this strategy after this session today. And again, the table goes over 2 pages there. If you have any questions on any of these here, feel free to ask and I can expand as well. I think most of them are straightforward. Oh, I do want to say one thing, sorry, while you're reading. Pretend you're looking into a room and describe what you're seeing yourself do. I know that might sound strange to you. That's a great strategy where you're trying to think about yourself in third person. It allows you to be, again, less critically reflexive about yourself. And I really like that because now I'm trying to do more of the show, not tell. I'm trying to look in and I'm describing what Rob is doing, not, hey, this is what Rob did. That to me is like, I'm trying to do a little bit more storytelling there. Now, also remember when you're a student studying for a final exam, there's like a push and pull. Like sometimes you need to do a little bit deeper dive, but also you don't want to exhaust yourself or really psych yourself out by like just studying so like way too much, right? So again, is that balance. So I often look at like, where am I at in the cycle of like my storytelling and brainstorming? And I don't, again, want to maybe produce too many stories. In this case, if I have 5 questions, I'm going to strategize and probably think like, well, I want to try to get like 10, look at what my top 5 are. How many of those of the top 5 could I like repeat for certain questions, and they're flexible and adaptable in some way. So again, remember, when you're maybe struggling with whatever stage you're at, just take a moment and say, okay, what would I do if this was a final exam? And I bet you'll come up with a specific action that will help you get out of the funk that you might be in. Okay, great. Let's see what the popular one here is. Your resume. That makes sense, right? Your resume and cover letter obviously did really well to get you to this step, right? We sometimes forget that. And we also assume that they read our resume and cover letter. They do not, or they might not remember those details, right? So again, that's you're not repeating anything. It's a really good place to go to for some more stories. The memo one, that's interesting. That is popular. The walking. Yeah. I didn't think that would be the most popular one. I love doing this. I'm always surprised to see what people actually choose. Okay. That's writing your story. We're trying to get actual notes your textbook, right? And so a lot of it is just getting those notes down. So now I'm not going to go in the order of the process of studying. I want to go in order of like what I think is a little bit more juicier to handle. And then we can speed up through the last part is going through your notes. So here's an example process. This is literally something that I would do. I'm not saying you would have to do it, but one way you can start approaching is like, what's your study process? Right? What are the steps of studying? The first year is just like, I just highlight, I just read, right? And it's a lot more refined and very different as we practice and as we go through the years in undergrad. So one thing I start with it, I go, why are they asking this question? So again, this is specific to me. I'm not saying you have to do it, but I want to just walk you through my thought process. Why are they asking this question? And I really think about them. What are they actually trying to hear? Like sometimes if you hear the question, we just respond, and when you actually think about the answer you're providing, like how is that helping them make a decision on me as a candidate, whether I'm being the one placed in the program or being hired for a job? I think about show not tell, benefits over features. So a lot of times I want to make sure that I'm maybe showing, being descriptive, not overly descriptive, or I might speak to more of like the the things I'm offering or the things that I'm unique, rather than hey, I've done these things, I have these certifications, these skills. Sometimes I'll use those certifications maybe to as a detail, right, to again get to the benefits, but I kind of think about that a lot when I'm starting to go through my stories. Number three, what I again take now, what I'm doing is I'm taking the stories and maybe identifying which of these are going to be useful. And so I just want to remind myself to answer the question directly. So when I take these stories, as I write it out, I'm like, how do I make sure I take this story and answer the question directly first and then use the story? I'm going to try to use in my writing, as I'm editing my story, I'm going to use some framing to help the listener. So if I was to, say to you like, hey, we have 3 different things to cover in this interview session. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C does 2 things for me. It helps me understand where I'm at in my question, especially if I have 3 minutes. And also I will help the listener so they just kind of know, oh, I know where this is going, rather than it starts and you're like, I don't know where this story is going. Like sometimes that can really detach a listener. So I'm going to try to use the framing when I can. I might not do it all the time. It might get too repetitive, but I certainly probably do it for the bulk of my questions, my answers, sorry. And then I'm going to be explicit and do not assume that they remember my cover letter or resume. And so what I'm trying to do is balance not too much detail, but a specific detail that might be vivid. I think what happens is we feel like we have to explain the entire job so they can get a sense of like the importance and what we did. And, sometimes you might be able to do that, but you want to just think of like, what do they need to know to help this story, right? Again, I use this metaphor all the time with all of you, like a romantic comedy. They don't talk about the first hour, all the heartbreaks this character went through. So then when we join them, you're like, oh, I understand why they are depressed, right? That's just too much detail. It's more like show, not tell. You pick up a picture, they sigh, obviously implies that you're no longer with this person. Those are little touches that they can have where you fill in the blanks as a viewer or listener, and that's okay. But again, it's a vivid detail, show, not tell. Then I will say maybe something, how's my response unique, but relevant? I also think of like, if everyone's zigging, how can I zag? Listen, all of you have very similar, broader things, right? You love food, nutrition, and health. You want to make an impact. You want to help people. You have maybe experiences that something happened to you or a family member, and you saw a dietitian that helped you. Like those are maybe broad themes, and that's okay. But you want to be able to then get specific, because you need to think about like, well, how can I showcase maybe the similar broad theme in a unique way? That's again, engagement in storytelling. And then the number one thing is tying the story back to the role, right? So that's kind of going through my notes. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's applied in a moment. So I'm going to just let you take a look at, these are listing what questions could you ask for yourself, or what strategies do you want to test? And so my favorite ones I talked about is the framing, ABC 1, 2, 3. So I'm rewriting my notes and stories that way, or I tie the story back to the role. The other one is a favorite is I actually then identify 5 stories where I connect multiple skills or values that they're looking for, because I want to have a story ready that I can just tweak a little bit depending on the questions they're going to ask. That is like a final exam, everyone, where again, in first year, we tried to memorize and like every single type of question they could ask, or we would memorize an answer to one specific question. But then you get to the final, like, I've never seen this question before. And it's like, yeah, that's what a final does. It's testing your knowledge and sometimes also how you apply that knowledge. So again, don't fall in the trap of like, I'm going to prepare for every single type of question that they're going to ask, because that might throw you off. Certainly you can even thematically bunch your types of questions as well, right? Oh, this is a question about collaboration. This is a question about communication. So it's also just identifying those questions quicker as well. So you could practice that, like actually look at a stack of questions, say, what is this asking? What is this about? What is this asking? Just like you get better at identifying the question. Classic, right? Is I've done it. You answer the question because you're like, boom, on attention. And then you realize you read it later, like, oh, I didn't even answer the question, right? You get the test back. You're like, whoops, I was way off. So I really actually spend a little bit of time identifying and connecting these two skills and values. And I usually do that in concept map. There's a whole bunch of other things in here. So I'm going to let you just take a look at any of these ones that are potential. Oh, I should say one more thing. I love using flashcards. So I'll tell you one more thing. I'll take my story. I'll have it maybe in paragraph form. I'll write out all the details. I start editing. I then maybe use the CAR method at that stage to get 3 bullets. I write 3 bullets on a cue card, and then on the index card and on the back side, then I have 3 words that are going to serve as prompts for me. So I'm not memorizing it, but I'm practice the story enough that when I see that word or remember that bullet, it prompts my brain to then speak to those 3 things. And that's something I've done in the past. Okay, I'll let you select something here. Give you just like less than a minute before we move on. One note, another strategy. I think sometimes we're worried about repeating ourselves. I don't mind actually using repetition to help strengthen my story. So I might say it explicitly at the beginning. I might go 1, 2, 3, and then at the end, I'll summarize again. And I think that's really a good way, because remember, a listener, just because you say it once doesn't mean that they're going to hear it, right? And so I might help that listener again, really, with that repetition, help them. That's different than repeating like just a broad phrase, right? Which can be like almost sound annoying. And then I will tell you, I just, have been doing a bunch of interviews recently. And again, a lot of times something is shared and it's expected like, oh, then can you see that I would be good for this job? When really you have to explicitly, like, it's so funny. Like, of course you're there for interview to get into dietetics, but I think you have to constantly connect what you're offering your stories to how it's going to be relevant or why it's connecting to dietetics, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of glossed over it, but number 7 there, tie the story back to the role. And and a lot of you put actually +6 there. That's something that a lot of people do not do. They just kind of say something and then leave it. So again, I really encourage you to make sure you make those explicit connections for them. 3 minutes is actually longer than you think too. Okay, great. A little bit of everything there. All right, let's talk about practicing exam and building confidence now. These are things that I would actually be doing if I was in your scenario. So number one, it's like getting ready for an exam. Sometimes, and again, in first year, you're like, I don't know where this room is. I don't know where, and you get more comfortable. You might have a lucky pen later on. You have certain like habits and superstitions. I think that's okay to develop some of those things to make yourself feel a little bit more safe for the interview. So for instance, we know this is Zoom. So I would definitely be maybe spending 5 minutes, 10 minutes fiddling around with just my setup, just so I feel comfortable. Just like for this webinar, I fiddle around all the time to just set up like the screen. So I don't want to be surprised on the day of. So I would really think about recording myself on my phone or Zoom beforehand. I want to also select strategies that get me. This is practice exam time now, everyone. So what I'm trying to do with a practice exam is I want to replicate the stress that I feel, that heightened nervousness I feel in a real situation on a final. I can't replicate it, of course, but I'm going to try to do that. So that means right now I might be trying to increase my pace or create just like uncomfortable situations for myself, or make sure I'm not really practicing like just doing the same things over and over, right? It's like when you go to the gym, if you just do the same exercise over and over, your gains get lower over time, right? Because you're just your muscles are just trained to kind of do the same thing. You're not creating any tension for your muscles to actually work harder, to tear apart, to grow back stronger. Same idea with this. So for me, recording myself on the phone or Zoom is really weird. I don't like it. Recording my voice is the same thing. So that's why I identified that would be something good that I would do. In many cases, you could just, again, open up Zoom, fire off one question. You don't need to do all 5, right? You can just do in mini pieces. Or again, use your phone. That way you can watch it back here and there. You don't have to spend too much time, but you can analyze a little bit of what's going on. Recording your voice again, hearing for maybe ums, is it confidence? What's your tone? Again, your confidence is going to feed into your tone. So like a lot of times, like I think about like, how do I have to prep myself before I start talking? One thing I didn't write it here is I think about like a persona. So I think about like, where have I had success in my past life? Well, I used to be a camp counselor a long time ago. So often when I do interviews, when I'm really nervous, I start talking monotone and I can't get out of it. And I just now, and then I almost like, just play this mental game of like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Right. So I get panicky sometimes. So what I do is I take a deep breath and I'm like, I'm going to be camp counselor Rob, where I suddenly just pretend I'm at the camp and my body goes into these patterns where camp counselor Rob, I want to be 10% more on the Zoom is the way I want to think of it. You can't be your normal self. So again, how can I show my engagement, my tone of voice, but also being very careful. You don't want to be something that you're not either, right? So if you're like, that's not me, that's okay, but you can be more of who you are. So if you're someone calm and collected, like, yeah, ramp that up 10%, where they're really feeling like this sense of calm coming across, the way you're talking, the way you're framing things, right? Notice I just changed my voice and cadence a little bit. So I would practice that. You could take a list of interviews. Someone did that jar method, cut them up. I like to just take one out randomly to surprise myself, do a mock. This is my number one strategy. I do this all the time. If it's especially important. I have one friend that we actually take turns with over our careers in the last 20 years. So that's something that you can start thinking about. How could I develop that? Again, flashcards of prep. This is one that I've been working on. As you can see, I'm not doing it too successfully. I think you really need to practice talking to camera. Everyone look at the difference here just on your end. You make some notes for yourself. This is me looking into the camera. On your end, maybe you're finding it more engaging, like I'm speaking to you, but I will say on my end, it feels really awkward because the screens are down here or the face is down here. So I would actually be testing out moving the screen and the faces near the camera. Listen, I know we don't necessarily have the resources, and I don't want to really say this out loud, even though I am saying it on a recording here, but you might want to borrow a camera from someone, like a webcam, because it is movable, and then you can get better placement because your laptop is fixed. So notice I could move it to the side of my monitor if I need to, whatever it is. So you can play around with that. That's something that you might want to consider. You could actually buy something, I guess, technically, and then return it, but you didn't hear that from me, even though, again, I just recorded that for perpetuity. And also maybe even looking at changing up your sound, your mic. Again, I think about if you're using like a wireless buds, those are not as good and strong. Like think about having a microphone closer. That might be, again, practicing with just your regular Apple earpods, like earphones, for instance, because then you can hold it like that. In this case, you can hear my voice difference by just getting closer to the mic, but you don't, again, want to like practice suddenly using all this new equipment either. You want to just be efficient and effective as well. But you can see, again, you can hear my voice probably much better than if I'm standing back here. And you know what? Sometimes that can make, just different impressions. So that's something you might want to just test out digitally in terms of your voice. And then, that's also putting your notes around in the proper places. Like I'm pretty sure they're saying like you can't have everything written out, but certainly like, you'll be able to have some post-its, some prompts. This is the way I go with this, everyone. Think about an open book exam. Everyone's like, yay, open book. And then you realize over the years, it's actually not good. And so I think, writing out all your full stories, that's not going to help you find it. But certainly if you can have like, just maybe a post-it note here with a prompt there, I think that's certainly advantageous and helpful during this. But you also want to practice that you're not just looking at and reading off, because they're going to see that, and that will work against you, right? So be very careful in terms of how you're prepping and organizing that day. The other one I would do is like, your time slot, look at where you are in the room, where your lighting source is, and test it out. And like also, why not practice recording at the exact same time of the day, right? So you're getting a feel of it. And you want to really look at your lighting, everyone, making sure your laptop, your video camera is in between you and the main lighting source. So right now I do have a small little, lamp here. So to light up my face a little bit, which is, not making too much of a difference right now because I have a lot of light here. So probably even need to get it maybe even a bit closer. It's okay. I have some natural light, but sometimes you might have too strong of a natural light that washes out your face. Certainly you want to make sure you illuminate your face and making sure that you are also framing your face a little bit tighter. So those are things that I'm thinking about. You could have a timer. I usually run my phone when I'm doing a workshop with a timer there, so I can have those sort of things there. But yeah, those are all little things that I'm practicing. I even practice some hand gestures sometimes. Like some interesting ones is like just even sometimes going like this, 1, 2, 3. Now you don't want to do too much, right, to distract them. But I think sometimes some emphasis or like even leaning in a little bit. I don't think we think about that a lot, right, with the camera. So, sometimes being in a fixed spot and tight might be too much. In this case, I'm pretty happy today because I am standing while I'm presenting, which is a little different than sitting. So those are all little things that you can start thinking about. I'm going to be quiet and let you take a look at some of these. I've also included, there's another Careers Online interview webinar, that link there, that's going to be run. Actually, I don't know which of my colleagues. I think it's great to go to because they'll be broader. I mean, not broader, but like more interview style kind of tips. But I think it's great to, again, if you have an hour to sit down, listen to someone else, get a different perspective, because certainly what you're getting is like my biased kind of strategies today. So they'll probably talk about a lot of these ones. So that's on the 20th. They're at 11. The UBC Dietetics student community is offering an interview prep on Monday, the 18th. It's on Zoom. They really asked me to share this, but wanted to be very clear. They have limited student mentors available. So they're asking only sign up if you actually have an interview this year. Okay. So there's some of you right now on this, like, oh, I want to just like learn. Please, please make that available for some of your fellow students who are really trying to prepare for their interviews in the next while. Okay, go ahead and select one thing, and then I'm going to do one last exercise with you to wrap it up. Thank you to all of you for hanging in there so far, and then I'll stick around for just a little bit to answer maybe any specific questions as well. I'll be honest with you. I have done previously for um, interview practice recording my voice a lot, because then I can listen to it while I'm brushing my teeth or like cleaning laundry. Like, I want to actually be able to do some practicing in different spaces, and I want to increase that maybe in my day to be a little bit more efficient and effective. So I've that's personally something that's been very useful for me. I will usually also take pictures of my flashcards so they have them on me at all times, so I can be like in the lineup at the grocery store, look at it once, put it away, kind of say it out loud, and test things out. Again, I'm practicing my stories all the time. Like when I'm doing any webinar workshop, if I have a story at the beginning, I like my personal strategy is like I want it to sound like almost conversational, almost as if I just thought of it in the moment. I don't want to be like rehearsed. That's my personal strategy. I've seen people do very well with rehearsed things. I mean, that's like a TED talk, really, right? So those people rehearse those beats. So I think it's okay to, as long as you understand what you like and how you want to present yourself, because you're going to have someone do the opposite. So you got to also build confidence in what you're trying to do. So my personal strategy is I just like to have a few words to prompt me, but that doesn't work for all of you. In many ways, I do want to share though, even though it sounds like I'm saying the story off the top of my head, I've actually practiced those stories and thought about them quite a bit. In the it just in the moment, it sounds like, oh, I want to tell you about this. So just want to be a little bit open in terms of like the behind the scenes of what's going on. Okay. This is a nice way, again, to think about your stories, about applying your learning. So you can think about those things like direct experience, translating experience, demonstrating your learning, maybe even added value. Sometimes there's unique things that you've done that other people have not, unique interests. There's a way to maybe layer that in. That might be in a question where maybe like, is there anything else you want to tell us about yourselves, where you're laying your unique experience or knowledge or skill set, and how it then applies to dietetics or will bring in a different perspective. So that this infographic might be useful to some of you. And I'm going to just practice one right now. I'm going to do 2 takes for you. So what I'm going to do is get you just write some observations. You can be very vicious. I mean, don't be so mean. Okay. I do have some feelings, but I'm going to try to test out, and I'm going to think about maybe 3 things that we've actually covered in this session. And so one's not going to be better than the other, but I want you to maybe identify maybe the choices or just even like interesting things that you're noticing. Okay. So I'm going to use the tell us about a time you struggled on a team, and you can, find a spot, and I'm going to just do this twice and allow you to get a sense of maybe what it could look like if some of you are still kind of struggling with some of this. So give me a second. Let's do take 1. I could just think of, I had one in my head here. Okay. So the question is, tell us about a time you struggled on a team. Oh, that's a really great question. Can you give me just like 10 seconds just to think about that? So when I hear this, I think about the time that I was working as a science teacher. There was another colleague of mine. We had to work together on an advanced placement project, and it was a little bit frustrating because they were not like following up on the things that we talked about, and we had this deadline to meet to send out all the advanced placement. Like we have to send it off to the center, and so what I did is I sat down with them one day, and I just kind of asked like, hey, what's going on? And how can I maybe support you? And they were able to talk about some of the challenges that I weren't aware of going on at home. And so I said, okay, well, let's actually just work together right now, and maybe let's block off a couple of times we can meet after school right away. So then you don't have to worry about it when you go home. So we can make sure we do that. And so we were able to like kind of hash things out. And then from there, we were able to, like we did struggle, but we were able to then, accomplish what we needed to do. Okay. So that was one try. And, if I was doing this on my own, it's okay for me to record this and keep on doing little different iterations and versions. And I think all of you were catching things that I was purposely trying to do. Let's try another take on that. Right. And so I'm going to do one more take again. I'm not going to say it's better than this one or not, but let's give me a second here. So the question again is, tell us about a time you struggled on team. Well, that's a really great question. Give me just 5 seconds maybe to think about that. So the example I want to tell you about is a time when I struggled on team was I was having difficulty meeting a deadline. So for me, we were working with 4 of us, and we had this career project that was due. And I was just I was just having a lot of difficulty doing the tasks and keeping track of what we were doing because I was like new to the role. And I was actually also juggling like 3 other projects at the time. And looking back, I realized that there's 3 things I could have done better. Number one, I should have done a better job of recognizing that I was taking on too much. It was one of those times that the project was actually a side project and I was very interested in, and it's offered up to it, but I should have actually said no and been able to identify that at that moment. Number two, I probably should have communicated earlier to my group because I was already feeling that stress and tension, but I just kind of let it keep on going, and it just actually got worse and worse and worse. Number three, I would also ask for help. Like I didn't ask for any help. And so really by not doing those 3 things, right? By not actually maybe saying no or understanding my boundaries a bit better. Number two, not being able to, clearly communicate where I was at. And number 3, not asking for help. That led to me actually not showing up very well on that project. And it was a real issue that we're able to fix in the moment and deal with, but it obviously created a lot of stress for that team. So I learned a lot from that moment, and I recognize that really communicating with myself and others is important when working on a team, which I know is something that I'm going to be much better at when I become a dietitian, because you're working with nurses and doctors, your clients and patients. There's so many different people that you need to be explicitly communicating with, and that's what I'm excited to do better with and do more of in the role of a dietitian. Okay, So those are two things that, I mean, both not that great, but again, just me practicing just off the top of my head. But you can see what I was trying to do with one and two. One was like, at some points, like it sounded like I was answering, but maybe not, right? And a lot of you looked at that. There's some decent things, but you can see the difference of even looking down the camera versus like I wasn't doing the best job in the second try, but I was trying to do a little bit better. And you can see that even that framing 1, 2, 3, I went 1, 2, 3. I try to summarize the best I can and then connect it to the dietetics role. Notice the first take two was actually not blaming myself, it was blaming others. And so I want to be very careful. I'm not saying vulnerability is always going to be the best thing, but I will say vulnerability does take some courage. But you can see that I was matter-of-factly talking about what I did wrong into showcasing more of a human thing. That's what some of this committee wants to hear. We're a little suspicious when we're interviewing people where it's only positive things, right? So this was me showcasing my learning. Sometimes what you can do, you can actually walk someone through their process of what you did to rectify a situation or do better. Notice in this situation, I didn't even say that I did better in that thing. I was just talking about what I would do better next time or what I'm working on. So that is a version as well. I think the better version is to actually maybe talk about what you did in the moment. But again, I was just thinking off the top of my head, I couldn't get there in time. So yeah, I think a lot of you really kind of notice maybe a little bit of a difference between those two. And I just wanted to make sure I tested that out with you so you could see what that looked like and what it might feel like when you don't connect it again, summarize or help frame it. And again, sometimes using some details. I use maybe someone said too much unnecessary detail in the first one. I think maybe I even used you're right. I didn't use too much detail about the actual thing. I used a lot of detail about what I was going through, what I was learning, what I was sharing. So that's a little bit different there. Okay. The last one is really quick, prep and organize. I just think about just real quick here, set up, schedule, talking to others. So these are just some quick considerations. I think about studying, like scheduling those interview practice in your calendar. I think about things of picking out your outfit the night before. I think about writing, what the backup procedure is just in case your internet goes. I would probably ask everyone, roommates, to clear out at that time. Like, let's not use up the bandwidth. You could even phone your cable provider and say, I want to upgrade to the highest internet speed, and then call back to downgrade it the next day, right? Just these little things that you might want to think about. I want to wrap up here because we're at time here. This to me is a really important step again for writing. Write down what's one takeaway from today. First of all, I appreciate seeing what you learned, but it's a great way for you to actually make sense of what just happened, and it creates stronger neural pathways. And hopefully it's going to remind you, like, you know what? I've been doing a lot of stuff. I've been practicing, and I got one great idea now to test out, and work off that one idea and then get another and another. And I know that all of you at the end of the day, listen, all of you can't get into dietetics. We know that, but I also know that, I think of like the times that I've been really proud of some interviews that I went to where I really prepped, I did my best, I didn't get the job, but I don't think about that one as much as the ones where I didn't prep as much, or I just showed up and I didn't get the job, right? Like sometimes when I put my best foot forward, I'm like, that's all I could do. And sometimes I wasn't a best fit for it. It wasn't meant to be. It's tough, but it's helpful. And I really hope that all of you realize you're building some very good career skills moving forward, whether you get into dietetics or not. And I wish all of you best of luck with your process and practice in the next while. I will be posting this recording on the LFS YouTube, but it is the long weekend. So Friday and Monday are holidays. So the person that helps me with that won't be able to post it probably until maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. Okay. So